Hello, welcome to Nyambung, a program to make you click and connect with me, Dina Praptoraharja, and my co-host, Nadila Amani. Hello Nadila, how are you?
Hello, Dinna. I'm well. Even though the rising cases of the COVID-19 in Indonesia is honestly quite affecting my stress level, though. But how are you?
Luckily, I'm well too. Great to see you again, although we still have to connect online all the time. Let us hope that this pandemic go away soonest, yeah?
Yeah.
In terms of our episode number, which number are we now, Nadila?
Yes, today at 25th June 2021, we are going to record our fifth episode, actually, Budina. It's the fifth episode of Nyambung podcast. And before we start, of course, I hope we are always going to be healthy. I hope our listeners are forever going to be healthy too.
Amen.
Let me remind you all to stay at home if you can. Obey the health protocols, eat a lot, and rest a lot. Okay.
Good idea.
Budina, you rest a lot too, Budina.
I have to, though. Quite impossible.
Okay.
All right, let us thank you also, our listeners who have give us support, send us the like, share, and subscribe to our podcast and YouTube. We very much appreciate your support and look forward to your suggestion of topics or even questions.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, Budina. So, Budina, I heard that today we are going to talk about some exciting stuff, okay? The United Nations General Assembly. Can you tell us more about our discussion today?
Yeah, today let's discuss about the United Nations General Assembly, commonly abbreviated as the UNGA. There has been several developments there that require our attention, I think. I would take this opportunity to draw a picture about what it may mean for people and countries in Asia, given what happened in the UNGA. So we are going to take 4 subtopics for today. The first one is the 75 UNGA resolution dated 14 July 2021. It was a voting on the resolution titled Prevention of Armed Conflict, focusing on the situation in Myanmar. This is a resolution that includes a call upon all member states to prevent the flow of arms into Myanmar, to respect the will of people as expressed in the results of general election in Myanmar back in November 2020. Also to immediately and unconditionally release the detained politicians and civilians, and to swiftly implement the 5-point consensus reached at the ASEAN leaders meeting back in Jakarta, April 2021. So in that segment, I will discuss the content of the resolution, the standing of the countries, what has been discussed about the resolution, and what I think about it.
Okay.
The second topic will be another UNGA resolution this year that calls for the United States to end Cuba embargo. And this is the 29th consecutive year that such resolution is being taken. And interestingly is the voting outcome, of course. The US didn't budge, doesn't change its position. It wants to continue embargoing Cuba. So I will discuss the content of the resolution, the standing of the countries, and what I think about it. So I think it's also useful as a subtopic number 3, we discuss multilateralism in practice globally. I will share thoughts on what's the expectation on multilateralism and the reality of it so far. Last but not least, given at the beginning we already talked about some issues affecting ASEAN, I think it's also important for us to spare some time and talk about the impact of the practice of multilateralism to regional cooperation such as ASEAN.
Okay. Maybe let's just start. Okay, let's discuss the first item on our discussion list today. You mentioned about the 75th UNGA resolution, Budina. I'm so to say UNGA, but it's UNGA.
UNGA, UNGA. That's how you say it.
I'm so contempt to say UNGA, Budina. Dated back in 14th June 2021, a voting on the resolution titled Prevention of Armed Conflict focusing on the situation in Myanmar. Regarding to this, I noticed that once again the Indonesian media take the issue on the situation on Myanmar as a center stage on primetime TV news and media coverage. If I could list the topics such as the abstain of the 4 ASEAN countries from the UN resolution on Myanmar, the 230,000 of Myanmar residents becoming refugees due to conflict, to the clash between the junta and the anti-junta that killed 800 civilians that happened recently, to the update on the international reaction on relationship to the junta. These 4 topics becomes headlines on some of the media and being continuously updated. This is a sign that Indonesia continues to be committed to airing what is going on in and with Myanmar. Indonesia supports the resolution, right, Budina? But since some countries in the region were abstain on the resolution, would the resolution make much impact to the situation on the ground?
Okay, Nadila, first let's discuss the content of the resolution. The United Nations has 193 member states. 119 voted in favor of the resolution, but one country, Belarus, voted against it. 36 abstained, which means 37 member states did not vote.
Okay, Budina, maybe if I could ask, what is abstain, Budina?
Abstain in the context of United Nations may mean several things. On the one hand, it may mean that the country simply doesn't want to take position, either because of their situation at the domestic levels or because they have other role to play at the regional level or with other forums that they are engaged with. Or the second possibility is that they are not quite happy with the resolution. There are some aspects of the resolution that they wish can be taken out, so that they feel that it's much better for them to show a sense of, at least it's not rejection, but it's just incomplete, not a complete support of the resolution itself. Okay. Because if you reject, basically you simply don't think the resolution is relevant at all. But if at least some part of the resolution is considered necessary, some country would take the position of being abstain.
Okay, now I get it. Okay, Budina.
So the resolution this time shows that there is a strong tendency for most member states of the United Nations to reject several things. So the resolution, with the support of 119 countries, strongly reject attacks and violence against civilians by the authority. Second, recognize that the military must end restrictions on the internet and social media, and instruct that all member states need to prevent the flow of arms into Myanmar. So this is a breakthrough, in my view, for getting a global common position against the military junta that's been causing layers and layers of problems inside of Myanmar for months. It's entering the 5th month already. So please note that only one country reject, only Belarus. And Belarus is not a neighboring country, nor a country that would determine the follow-up actions on the resolution. So to me, the voting and the conclusion of this resolution give me a sigh of relief because last month there was a point where the resolution was pending. It took a month for them to go into this position. Why? Because one member state insists that ASEAN member states should take a vote as a bloc. So everybody should take common same position, which I think it's impossible because they are not in one position, and let it be like that. So the UNGA's resolution gives more reason for Tatmadaw to see that the world is growing tired, of what the Tatmadaw has been doing, that they are willing to say openly that what Tatmadaw is doing is unacceptable, and that the leadership of the world does not hesitate to be hard and tough against the military junta. With the UNGA resolution, this actually strengthens earlier issuance of condemnations from the UN. If we recall, several weeks ago, there was condemnation by United Nations Security Council on the death of hundreds of civilians and the rapidly deteriorating situation and the use of violence against peaceful protesters. Of course, we know that not all permanent members of United Nations Security Council agree to the condemnation. Some already mentioned that the resolution, the statement was watered down significantly by China after a very tough 2 days of negotiation. Nevertheless, this is two UN bodies already saying something really strong about Tatmadaw, about what should be done to Tatmadaw, and what should not be happening again inside of Myanmar. Of course, one thing to notice is that ASEAN is divided. Thailand abstained, Brunei abstained, Laos and Cambodia also abstained for various different reasons. Thailand, for instance, is saying to the media that the resolution failed to take into account the historical context of the conflict. This is the word that they use, that I just quote. That the resolution, they say, could adversely affect a peaceful settlement and magnify the security challenges for Thailand if the conflict remains prolonged. Brunei doesn't say specifically about why it take the abstain position, but many argues that the position of Brunei as chair of ASEAN puts the Brunei in difficult position of saying no. It somehow need to provide solution for the conflicts in Myanmar, but at the same time, it realizes that some member states remained adamant about being more decisive, about the conflict. So my take of it is that these ASEAN member states basically only think about themselves. They have difficulty of thinking beyond national interests. They forgot that once they are in ASEAN, they also have to think about collective needs. Of course, Brunei, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, each has some domestic considerations to consider. Like, for instance, Thailand, I know they are very afraid that if they suggest that what Myanmar junta is doing is unacceptable, it will reflect badly on them because they're also military junta. Cambodia is also led by military men. Laos is an authoritarian regime that basically also always try to prevent any change to the status quo inside of the country. So the question is, why can't you think beyond what's going on in your country? This is, after all, a regional issue that would create a spillover effect to the neighboring countries. So at least they should think a bit farther than just their inside issues, domestic issues. So another thing that you have to realize, Nadila, is that India, China, Russia, and some countries in Middle East, such as Saudi and United Arab Emirates, abstained as well. I think my take on this is that the neighboring countries of Myanmar is obviously cares very little about what's going on inside of Myanmar. They would rather prevent any refugees coming to their countries, but at the same time, they too don't want to. They don't want to take the chance to become more, what do you call it, resourceful to the conflict that's been going on in the neighbors arena. So what I'm most concerned about is that means that killings, displacements, violence is not seen as something urgent in their eyes. It's just another daily occurrence, you know.
Yeah, and this is so interesting for me too, Budina, because what I know is Russia and China is also kind of like trying to talk with the junta too, right? Recently.
True. So if you look at the pattern, countries there are either authoritarian or illiberal in democracy tend to be ignorant about conflicts and killings and displacements and violence. This is an alarming sign for the rest of the world, for those who have been fighting for dignity of human beings and human rights. This is a serious setbacks. So I, for one reason, believe that at least with the UNGA being quite open about what to condemn is already a good progress. This is at least showing to the world that the majority of countries of the world still have a sense, still have respect to human dignity. Especially if I compare with the November 2019 resolution that the UNGA also issued on the situation in Myanmar. Back at the time, the issue was about human rights violations against the Rohingya Muslims and the minorities. What we can notice at that time, 140 countries was in favor to condemning the action, to express grave concern. Basically, that's what the language they use, at continuing reports of serious human rights violations and violations of international humanitarian law against the Rohingya and other minorities. So 140 countries was in favor, much more than the number of countries saying agreement to the blockage of to the embargo of weapons and also to stopping violence ongoing in Myanmar today. But at that time, the country who were against were more countries. There were 9 countries: Belarus, Cambodia, China, Laos, Myanmar, Philippines, Russia, Vietnam, and Zimbabwe. So if we look back, the position of the countries that reject, it includes 1, 2, 3, 4 member states of ASEAN. Five member states of ASEAN: Cambodia, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Philippines, and Vietnam. Whereas in what just happened this month, Myanmar agree to the embargo. So the representative, the ambassador of Myanmar in the UN, which is not from the military, decided that that's a good position to go. So that's a green light, from the country, relevant country. There's no reason why other countries that is not directly involved would say no to supporting Myanmar, right? That's the logic. And then if you notice the other countries in ASEAN who was against, now they are just abstain. So at least it's a more encouraging sign, yeah, that something can change at the international level, and that's through the UNGA. Yeah, I think many dynamics, yeah, we can discuss about the UNGA, but in my view, what just happened at the UN supposedly should boost the confidence of ASEAN, boost the confidence of the NUG, the National Unity Government inside of Myanmar. Of course, some hard works are still needed by countries supporting the resolution, including Indonesia. That is to convince, to push for the abstain country to change position. But again, to abstain doesn't mean to reject. So some things can still be discussed, negotiated. So that's a good progress. And we just need to prioritize what issue to negotiate. And I think one of the critical thing to do is to make sure that the neighboring countries of Myanmar, those sharing borders, would agree to provide humanitarian assistance, to make sure that they don't just block their borders, and please stop the flow of deadly weapons to enter Myanmar. Do you know which country has been supplying weapons to Myanmar, Nadila?
Which countries, Budina? Please spill the tea.
Actually, many countries supply weapons to Myanmar, but of course they are the big suppliers. That includes China, India, and Russia, and the United States. Okay, other sources include South Korea, Philippines. They say as well. Maybe that's from USA after all, Philippines, and then Israel, Ukraine. So there are some countries also supplying. But so talking about weapon supply, if you look back at the resolution, at least the countries who used to supply weapons, such as Korea, Ukraine, Philippines, Israel, and USA, are already agreeing to stop supplying weapons. Therefore, the homework remains to convince China, India, and Russia to not supply weapons. And again, their position is just abstaining. So there are still rooms to negotiate.
It's now it's no wonder we know that India, China, and Russia abstain. It's all crystal clear now.
Yeah. You always have a special direct interest to something so big before you block something, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, maybe one last point about the resolution is, the statement about making sure that everybody, all parties involved, make sure that the 5-point consensus made in Jakarta by the ASEAN leaders meeting can be implemented. Of course, everybody assumed that Brunei Darussalam, as the chair, has very critical role to make sure that progress can be made. And everybody can go, sad that Brunei Darussalam is abstaining to the voting. And I think worse even, Cambodia, which is the next chair for next year, also abstain. But I think if people recall of what I say last week, ASEAN should change their mindset. What happened in Myanmar is not ordinary daily business. This is not something that can be solved through the regular ASEAN way. And what I mean by regular ASEAN way is just negotiating among each member states, listening to each member state's position, and then making sure that everybody, the 10 member states, would agree to certain position. This is not gonna be that way. It's a different kind of context, different kind of reality. And don't forget, Myanmar agree for something fundamental to change inside of their country. That means that's a green light already for the rest of ASEAN member states, even if Brunei and Cambodia choose to be quite passive, to push for change. So the locomotive of change should be the countries who support the resolution. They need to propose some extraordinary meetings, special meetings inside of ASEAN, trying to consolidate the support and make sure that the Tatmadaw is not going to ignore this resolution. And this, I think next time maybe we can also discuss about this further. The latest the latest development in Myanmar is quite concerning, because Tatmadaw is doing revenge again to the civilians following this. And they start raiding, attacking mosques and, worship places. So this is really getting out of control and getting very, very ugly. So if if the rest of ASEAN member states who was in favor of the resolution doesn't do anything, I don't know what can be done. They should be brave and just, Brunei, you have to do this. Tatmadaw, you just have to stop. That's we require extraordinary measure at this very critical time in our history.
Okay, I agree with you, Dinna. The situation is getting out of hand and it's quite frustrating, actually. So we hope this will be the light indicating the end of the tunnel, right, Budina? Okay, maybe on to the next topic of the UNGA resolution, that they are also talking about the issue for the United States to end the Cuba embargo for the 29th consecutive year. With votings, the world from year to year have shown strong critique and demand to the US to end the embargo to Cuba, but still the US doesn't budge, as you said earlier. Maybe if I could talk a little bit about the background on Cuba so that we could know where the country stands and its relationship to Indonesia. Cuba is a country that houses 11.3 million of people that is located in the northern Caribbean Sea, south of the United States. Cuba, to many Indonesians, might heavily related to Fidel Castro. It's now deceased revolutionary leader. We are so familiar with that name. Okay, Cuba and Indonesia has established diplomatic relations in 1960 under the presidency of Sukarno, Indonesia's first president. Indonesia-Cuba relation is exceptionally close for their common position against polarism during the Cold War and against imperialism. And also, I remember that one of your colleagues in Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who also teach with you, is now an ambassador in Cuba, right, Budina?
Yes.
The first lady who is appointed as ambassador plenipotentiary potentiary and extraordinary ever posed in the country. Is that true, Budina?
Yes, Nadila, true. A very gentle and kind-hearted lady is now becoming the first lady ambassador to Cuba. Yes, Cuba is a fascinating country to learn from. It has one of the quite resilient country of the world. Interestingly, Cuba continuously being seen as a threat by the United States. It has been contained, it has been embargoed, exiled, but yet survive.
Yeah.
There was a great hope on Cuba-US relations. I recall when Obama was president of the United States, he normalizes the relationship between the two countries, even visited Cuba in 2016. So the first action at that time from the United States was that in May 2015, Cuba was taken off the US list of terrorist country. The Congress didn't block the intent because that's the mandate of the Congress actually to take that off. And then some import-export activities emerge back again between US and Cuba. Movie makers visit Cuba, concerts, trainings, even sports, trainings such as the Major League Baseball, flights, ferries are open. So there was quite lively reconnection between the two countries. But then this is what's been perplexing for me. 2 days ago, US President Joe Biden, one president who has been hailing multilateralism and peace during his presidential campaign, ended up continuing the Washington's tradition of voting against the UNGA resolution. So this UNGA resolution that we're talking about this time is calling for an end to a US economic embargo on Cuba. And what Joe Biden did was taking the same position with Trump, who decided to roll back all the normalization of relationship that Obama has introduced. What is going on, right? And most importantly, this is the 29th time that this happened. And interestingly as well, 184 countries of the 193 members of the UN voted in favor.
Yeah.
Only 3 countries abstained and 2 votes of rejection. And the voting of rejection came from the US and Israel.
Yeah.
So the US, tried to deny and justifying the action by saying that it's the Congress who can lift the embargo. So to me, this is one important thing for us to look at. You would think that with the return of the US to the promise of multilateralism, we will see something else going on, but we did not.
Okay. I'm curious though, Budina, what do you think the US is getting from the embargo to Cuba?
Well, I'm just an ordinary person, yeah. Well, if I look at the relationship between Cuba and the United States, I think it's been very complex. Not many international relations experts even can quite explain the nature of the relationship between the two countries. Some of it based on personalistic leadership that linger from the Cold War period. Some others is also about the US simply trying to show pressure against countries that they think may continue to be in disagreement with them on principal levels on certain issues. So I think it's important for us now to discuss about multilateralism, because I think that's the heart of where things are. But to me, before we end this conversation about Cuba is a very, Cuba in and all itself has a very vibrant life. It also has, customs, traditions. It has people who basically have to work with each other based on solidarity to survive all the pressures and embargo that they have been undergoing for years, for decades. And based on the information I gathered, the situation inside of Cuba is not quite enabling for many people, not for farmers, not for people who work in the service sector or in the especially manufacturing sector. It's not quite helpful, all of this economic embargo being continued. Do you know that 70 to 80% of food products in Cuba has to be imported? So it's very difficult if you live in Cuba. As my friend told me, the ambassador told me, they have to import chicken. They don't have many kinds of vegetables. So unless you grow yourself, there are very limited options of food products. So this is also something that the world barely consider, when they negotiate and take positions in multilateralism. So this is important for us now to try to look closer into multilateralism inside of the United Nations.
Yeah, okay, Budina. You mentioned a lot about multilateralism actually in the 75th UNGA resolution regarding to the United States to end Cuba embargo. As an ordinary person myself, this might sound a little complex, Budina, because now I think about the US, I think about the Cuba, and now I need to understand about multilateralism. Could you help me first understand what is multilateralism, Budina, before you go on sharing your thoughts about it?
Sure, Nadila. So the very simple definition of multilateralism is more than two countries coming together, being open about their standing in international politics. So a gathering of two countries being open about each other's standing in international politics is multilateralism. Usually they use certain platform, forum or dialogue meetings or something, or even organization to share, to discuss, and to look for common position on matters of concern. Multilateralism as a norm is adopted and recognized after the Second World War. The United Nations as an institution embody the norm of multilateralism. In the United Nations Charter, multilateralism is mentioned as determination to save future generations from war, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, to protect dignity of human, to provide equal rights of people, men and women, nations large and small. Everybody should enjoy social justice, peace, and social progress should be able to be enjoyed by every country around the world. So the principle of multilateralism is basically that, and it's a norm that is enhanced within the United Nations, basically. So if you look deeper into multilateralism, you would realize that multilateralism requires several things to work well. Number one, there should be conformity of member states. Everybody's working through the multilateralism forum to the principles and justice as agreed by everyone. So you have to conform. Number two, you have to behave in friendly manner based on respect, equity, and peace. You cannot sustain multilateralism with aggression and with behavior that's based on violence. The third requirement is the intent of parties to develop cooperation to solve problems. instead of showing the intent to conflict or to revenge. You have to sit back and cooperate. The fourth is the recognition of equal sovereignty of all members. So everybody else on the table has the same right as you to enjoy all the things we have mentioned earlier: dignity, social justice, peace, and everything else. The fifth aspect of multilateralism assumes that everybody else who are not member also would act in accordance with the principles. So any multilateralism would organize themselves in a way that allow them to negotiate, to inspire the non-member states to adopt the spirit of multilateralism. And of course, that would also mean all member states doing multilateralism work would reciprocate in action. They would share mutual behavior of cooperation, of friendly relations, of respect, of looking at each other as equal partner. So that's multilateralism as a norm and as an institution. Are you now good on the basics of multilateralism, Nadila?
Okay, maybe now understand a little bit more, Budina. So maybe I understand it as multilateralism is when more than two countries form a gang from an ally that share the same ideology on their international politics, right, Budina?
They have to form a good deeds of alliance, who shared some desire to achieve something together, and it should be shared.
Okay, Budina, now I understand.
Okay. Now, if you are good on that, we can move on to the multilateralism in practice.
Okay.
Of course, any norms and institutions, once practiced, may be more complex than imagined. Some unintended consequences may also be found. For instance, if you find a violation, if there's one member states or the party to the multilateralism who choose to violate the principles of the common goods, even if they are being very quiet about it, and worse, of course, if they are open and belligerent to the principles of the common goods, what do members do? How do they react? And what can the institution do? There's a terminology that people use. What's the point if the dog doesn't bark? So that's really critical, that if something bad is going on, what can the groups of country agreeing to multilateralism do? That's my first point. Second of all, people will watch. If the violator is a major country, would you do something about it? Can everybody else do something about it? Or would they just let it go? Like, it's not a big thing, it will solve itself. So one thing that everybody is realizing is that the logic of most countries nowadays is to be internationalist, which means that everybody is interested to grab all opportunities at the international level, and they would do anything necessary to make sure that they succeed in grabbing the opportunities. So the consequence of that may be, because it's the other side of the coin, is that once you see other people trying to take something away from you, you would like to go against it and try to balance your positions against those who may be perceived as disagreeing with you. So this is what people in the realist perspective see things. So they may sit together in multilateralism forum, but their mindset may differed from the principles of multilateralism itself. So I would show you several conditions, several circumstances that would enhance this realist perspective.
Okay.
So first is when multilateralism has to respond to global security issues, such as security dilemma. This is one serious block usually. Security dilemma is a situation where the action of one country is considered a threat to you, and so you would enhance yourself, either arm yourself or take a strong position against the country to show that you are threatened by them. And usually the reply would also be a perception of threat from the other party to you. So it will end up with a very enhanced sense of stronger threats. So this is what is usually not expected in international relations. Now, multilateralism usually cannot quite capture this kind of behavior. It can just happen between countries, and any kinds of rules usually may not constrain activities that raise worries, that raise fears, and some countries do have very paranoid perspective about other countries.
Yeah.
So that's number one situation. The second situation is when multilateralism agreement bring different implications for different countries. Either this is only at the perception level, or given different contexts, they may have different consequences for countries, or because the process of implementation itself will be different in different countries. So, for instance, the issue of human rights and terrorism. Let me give you the example of that. Internationally, of course, we would say human rights is universal to all nations. It should be something that everybody respect. But in different contexts where the awareness on human rights is uneven, and that the enforcement of respect to human rights is also uneven, one cannot quite pinpoint to the country that is supposed to be the duty bearer of the human rights as being ignorant about the human rights. Some would argue that we are not ignorant, we're just, we cannot simply blame the people and enforce sanctions, because it's also violating the process of them understanding better about human rights. So that's one example. Same thing with terrorism. On the one hand, combating terrorism is a universal value, but terrorism also comes from different groups. Some of them are vulnerable people. So whether certain action at the multilateral level can have negative impacts as well to the people on the ground, that's certain country affected would have things to say. It cannot be made uniform across the globe. So that's the second condition, the limits of multilateralism. The third limit of multilateralism is the condition where multilateralism agreement can be watered down. To get agreement at the UNGA, for instance, at the United Nations General Assembly, some countries do water down or make the wording much more ambiguous so that everybody can agree, which at the implementation level, it can be problematic. What we see in Myanmar is one example. You see that the UNGA decided that part of the solution should be done by ASEAN. And at the implementation level, this can be challenging because not all member states agree to swift action on Myanmar. So that's the limit of multilateralism. The fourth limit is that multilateralism doesn't eliminate bilateralism, or it doesn't exclude or reject countries from doing, relations on two-country basis bilateralism. So everybody expect that bilateralism and multilateralism will be complementary. They should support each other. It will strengthen multilateralism, but in practice, it may be far from the expectation. Some countries in the region, in ASEAN, has been enhancing more and more their bilateral relations with certain country to get more benefits from multilateral agreements that is achieved. So rather than providing relatively equal share of benefits from multilateralism agreements, they would rather to get more, and they are willing to nurture this chance by strengthening their bilateral relations with the country that they think can provide more benefits. So these are the four limits, if you can say, about multilateralism. In UNGA, Nadila, you also have to realize this is the only body in the international level where everybody sits equally. One country, one vote. Regardless of how many population you have or how rich you are, you can only have one vote. And the mandate of the UNGA is basically, I call DDR, discuss, debate, recommend.
It's not the DDR that is from time zone, right? The indoor playground, the one that you dance on, the DDR. It's not that.
Maybe they take from that situation. I don't know, but so it's to make you easy to remember. UNGA has the three mandates: discuss, debate, and recommend. They can recommend things to be taken to the other bodies of the UN, and of course, if you want to take swift actions against something, usually you send a recommendation to the United Nations Security Council. So UNGA and whatever being decided inside of UNGA is not quite having legally binding power. If every year that we watch on TV, basically usually debates of world leader in the UNGA forum, because every member state is given the chance to speak. And the leader of the country would read the statements. Although some countries in the past, the leader actually don't read from notes. They just keep talking, and they can talk for hours.
They just want to put what they have in mind. Budina.
Indeed, it can sometimes be a show of power of some countries. Well, the challenge, however, is to make the words substantive, right? You can say anything during the debate, but the point is whether you can deliver recommendations that would be followed up with concrete actions. And on top of it, Nadila, UNGA also has administrative mandate. They have to be the agency, the body that manages UN appointments and also make budget approvals. So activities of the UN, including of the Secretariat, needs to be approved by the UNGA. So it's a very busy but also very fat, big body of the UN. The products of UNGA is or include declarations, calls, and general debate. The one I mentioned every year. There's once a year general debate, and then they also must schedule their time to elect non-permanent members of the Security Council and members of the Human Rights Council as recommended by UNSC. They also have to appoint Secretary General. So it's a very busy body of the UN.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe another fact that some of you is yet to realize, in the UN, every member states pay annual dues.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody pay equally though, even though every country member has only one vote in UNGA. Mm-hmm. Those who has higher GDP has to pay more than others. And some others can negotiate so they can pay lower than they're supposed to.
Is that good or not, Budina? Because it's actually embodied equity, right?
Can you guess which country pay the most to the UN?
Which, Budina? Which one?
The United States.
Oh, that's cool then.
Well, but that's one reason too why they under Donald Trump presidency, they feel that they are being disadvantaged because of that. They have to pay too much on something that may not benefit them, they say.
Oh yeah. They need to pay a lot more to become attacked.
This is one reason why they try to evaluate, they call it evaluate the multilateralism. So, and which is a good time for us now to talk about evaluation of multilateralism, right? Many have critiques actually. Many have said that multilateralism inside of the UN has limits. Yeah. Even the 2005 report from Secretary General Kofi Annan at that time mentioned that UNGA focuses a lot on trying to get consensus. The consequence of trying to get consensus is that you water down statements to get people to agree to it, to get the lowest common denominator. The challenge, if you do so, is that you would become less and less relevant to many problems that's growing in the world. So at that time, the suggestion was to include hearings from experts inside of the UN. And actually, if you look to the history, the UNGA has tried on time to time to remain relevant, because this is the only forum in the world where leaders of the world can take position on something. And it was not impossible actually. So it's a choice of every generation sitting in the UNGA, I must say. If you look back in 1960s, the UNGA did suspend a South African delegation inside of the UNGA. Why? Because they practice apartheid, which they say is in violation of Security Council resolutions and international law. And they were only allowed to come back to the UNGA once a democratic transition was restored in 1994. And then in 1992, when Yugoslavia broken into pieces, Serbia and Montenegro were denied automatic inheritance of Yugoslav seat in the UNGA. So if I look closer to the UNGA, there are still reasons for us to be optimistic that something needs to be done. Something can be done, I should repeat in saying, because from time to time, if negotiators and diplomats are being very firm on pushing something through the UNGA, good things can happen through it. The latest position of the UNGA on Rohingya, I should commend as well as a good progress, because at least it comes to a position of condemning human rights abuses. A very good angle of the issue, human rights abuses. So that's why I think multilateralism cannot be underestimated and excluded as one of the mechanism to find solutions, on many regional issues and national issues that we face lately.
Okay, Budina. I'm curious though, Budina, you said that the Assembly suspended the South African delegation because South Africa is violating resolutions and international law because they practicing apartheid. Does that mean multilateralism is not putting these countries that are not following the rules with sanction?
They cannot. The one who can impose sanctions in a very concrete sense, like embargo as a sanction, but in the real sense of actually putting people on the ground to make sure that all the flights and the sending of or the transporting of weapons and arms are not happening. That's not the UNGA to do. That's Security Council duty. So the mandate of Security Council is to follow up on what is being recommended by the United Nations General Assembly, so that it can be made more implementable. So it's at the UNGA level, it's more about norms of the identifying the positions of all member states on certain matter that is written in the resolution of UNGA.
Okay, now I understand it now. So UNGA resolution may not be binding to the countries, but we should not undermine what the resolution can bring to solve the problems, right, Budina?
Yes.
It's a place. It's like a place for conducting discussion and discussion on what the solution, right, Budina?
Yeah. So multilateralism is still highly needed in today's world. The proliferation of problems emanating in different parts of the world requires common solution. You cannot expect every nationals to solve their own problems, because with the more internationalized cooperation, more internationalized travels, more internationalized interactions, economic, politics, socio-culture, even illegal activities, we cannot expect each country of the world to solve problems on their own. Sometimes we have to share resources, sometimes we have to share strategy, sometimes we have to pay, invest together so that the impact of the action is more powerful. So multilateralism is really something that is needed. But of course, what I've been talking about is that the future may be uncertain. Why? Because some countries decided to continuously trying to block decisions made at the multilateralism level. Even countries like the US have decided to pull out monies from multilateralism because they don't get what they want. So countries who realize that multilateralism is very much needed, needs to work extra to ensure that multilateralism doesn't collapse. So in the next podcast, we will discuss how the position of major countries such as the US, Russia, and China may affect conflicts and circumstances growing across the regions.
Okay. I'm looking for that, Budina, for the discussion. Now that I have learned a little more about multilateralism, maybe should we discuss about regional cooperation in the context of multilateralism, Budina? ASEAN in particular, because of course we lived in the region, and other than that, I knew that you worked inside of ASEAN for a number of years and have been paying attention to ASEAN for a long time. I'm curious, Budina, what is the multilateralism look like inside of the ASEAN?
Okay, quick answer to that is that ASEAN is not immune to shocks and compromises that the global community is also experiencing in its multilateralism. So when multilateralism at the global level is being undermined, or Julia Morse and Robert Keohane back in 2014 call it contested multilateralism, which is a situation where member states try to pursue their own strategies to challenge the rule, practices, missions, even the institution is being challenged so that they can get what they want. The situation of multilateralism itself can be compromised. So I would like to highlight how ASEAN is different in terms of multilateralism. Yeah, inside of ASEAN, basically countries are, coming together. First and foremost is to make sure that the region, Southeast Asia, is stable. And they realize, as member states of ASEAN, that their highest vulnerability is when some member states are persuaded, are made to be against each other and to experience penetration of influence that to the degree that's too much, that's leading to what they often use the term intervention, showing intervention of the regional matters. So ASEAN member states by nature has been very sensitive and quite suspicious to any signals of a potential intervention by foreign countries to countries in the region. That's the context of ASEAN. So in the current context of global engagements, ASEAN member states realize that different countries may get different rewards for what they do at the international level, especially to particular countries that are very eager to enlarge their power at the international levels. To me, this is natural. This is just, common thing that once you see opportunity, then you try to invest more in the relationship with that particular country that profits you. But the consequence of that is that you often forget to look at the bigger picture, that you don't live alone in the region, that the neighbors sitting next to you and not far from you are also getting the impacts of whatever it is that you are trying to get from the external powers. And this is what's been quite difficult inside of ASEAN. If I would say ASEAN after the ASEAN Charter is more and more becoming a sectoral in mindset. They include lots and lots of ministries to make sure that the ASEAN vision is being implemented for member states. But the consequence of that is, because there are so many agencies being involved, decision making can be really, really slow, even slower than how it used to be when ASEAN was still lean. Nowadays, ASEAN becomes big and fat, and every sectoral bodies require different approach and different pace of making decisions. And of course, that would imply lots and lots of meetings. With lots of meetings, that means more money needs to be spent to finance the activities. But if the money is available, let's say everybody can provide all this necessary financial requirements to come into a deal. The challenge is the timing. Can you make timely decisions given the circumstances that you have to consult so many bodies before you then channel the inputs or recommendations to the one who can make the highest decision in ASEAN is the leadership of ASEAN, the head of government or head of states, with the recommendations from the foreign ministers of ASEAN. That takes a long time, and there may be bottlenecks too. You know, there may be different interpretations once a recommendation come in the hands of foreign ministers. The foreign ministers may have different suggestions as well to the heads of states, heads of governments on what to do. And if the foreign ministers cannot come into a common position, they cannot have consensus on the issue, or they don't realize that it doesn't need consensus, they can just take a ASEAN minus decision, then a swift decision will not be taken at all in ASEAN. So what I'm saying is that multilateralism inside of ASEAN tend to be insensitive to time. Why? Because it depends a lot on the interpretation of different sectors. It requires time to get into the hands of the foreign ministers, and then again to the heads of states level. So it may start as a bottom-up institution, bottom-up procedure, where the sectoral bodies is supposedly taking inputs from civil society, from domestic constituents, but at the end of the day, because it takes so long to process the inputs, process the suggestions coming from people, it becomes a process that can be highly politicized. It can be highly compromised as well, what is being discussed. So in my view, ASEAN should realize these limits and adjust accordingly, so that the multilateralism that is supposed to enhance their work, what is being done in the UN, is supposed to help them relate with member states inside of the region, can actually be a strength instead of limitations. At this point, ASEAN has difficulty in translating back what is being determined or discussed and agreed at the United Nations level to the ASEAN level. Well, the intent initially is to make sure that if you have problems inside of ASEAN, you bring it to the UN level to get support. And then once you get the support, then what can you do something about it fast? So I think this should give you a bit more insights, of the complexity of multilateralism in practice, especially inside of ASEAN. ASEAN is big, and every meeting can take a long day. It varies by styles of people who come to the meeting. So in my own experience, I cannot say that if you work with certain ministry, then the style will be always the same. Not necessarily. And what's interesting is that different sectoral bodies have their own styles. They also have different schedules of meeting. Some meets every month, others meet once every 18 months. So they barely meet, not even once a year. So if your issue affect or if your issue requires decisions from that sectoral bodies, that means a very long time to expect to finish things up. And So issues like Myanmar, for instance, it has to go through many doors inside of ASEAN. Foreign ministers, yes, and then for humanitarian assistance, you go to the AHA Center, but for issues of human rights, you should go to ICHAR, for instance. Not to mention that the involvement of sectoral bodies such as the Defense Ministry, because the issue is now expanding to the issue of arms and weapons and security, which is not necessarily the domain of the Foreign Ministry. So it can be made more complex if ASEAN think like how usually ASEAN work in a peaceful situation. So this is a time for ASEAN to start thinking that, to start acting, not just thinking, I would say. I repeat myself. ASEAN should start acting differently, separating procedure during peaceful time and procedure during crisis. What we are observing at this point is situation under crisis. So please do not take positions or procedures that require similar timing as and actions as regular business as usual.
Please do not take your time, ASEAN.
We don't have time.
Do not take your time. Yeah, Bu Dinna, I agree so much. It seems so complex, especially sometimes not even the MOFA, right, Bu Dinna? Even like these countries need to get approval from their leader of the countries, that make it highly politicized. And when the leader of the countries tell something, it make their image different, make the relationship between the countries differ. It's so complex, it seems like.
But at least you can understand a bit more, right, about differentiating the positions of countries and the different contexts, right?
Yeah, Bu Dinna, of course. Like every discussion with you, I'm more enlightened. I feel like this is my weekly class. I feel like I need to pay for this class, and yet I'm getting it free. I feel so grateful, Bu Dinna. So thank you deeply.
It's still it's free for everybody. I like to share ideas and experience. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned for our next episodes because I feel like I can get degree from here. Like I majored in mass communication, but also I can have a degree in international relations too because of you.
Now you have an idea.
Okay, Bu Dinna.
Okay.
So thank you. Maybe we should follow up our topics in the next episode. We shall talk about the major countries, right, Bu Dinna?
Yes.
Position.
So, see you and thank you so much for your support.
Thank you so much for your support once again. Our podcast is available at YouTube and Spotify at Nyambung with Dinna Praptora Harja. Make sure to send us your questions or your thoughts through YouTube comment section. And if you enjoy the episode, don't forget to like, share the link to your community, and subscribe so you make sure you don't miss our contents because we post every week. Okay, Bu Dinna.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Bu Dinna.